Hey, I wanted to kick off a bit just to honor this room a little bit, because every Friday morning I get here and I'm just blown away at the men that are here gathering and seeking God. And, Ron, what you've built, what God is building in this room, and what the teams do. I was here around 6 o'clock talking to Franklin a little bit as well, too. And just the effort and the time that it takes to pull this together is unbelievable. And really a lot of that starts with each and every one of you. And so it's amazing to see so many men that are chasing the heart of God. And it's humbling to see that as well, too. And I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this message and thinking about you guys and the invitations. And I started to think about, what are the invitations in my life that changed the trajectory or changed kind of who I am today and what I do and how I seek God in any instance. And I started to think a little bit about my testimony. And no, listen, if I told my testimony, we'd probably be here for like the next 3 days for the most part. But because I haven't had the chance to meet a lot of you, I figured I'd give you a little bit of it and then tie it into our message as we're going forward. But to give you my background, yes, I am from really small town, East Tennessee, Maryville, Tennessee, just short of Knoxville. And I'll never forget, I grew up in a small Baptist church, guys. I'm talking like a church smaller. There are more men here than we ever had in that church. And, I can still smell like the wood grain of the pews. Those pews, if you guys remember, that you sit down and that you sit after about an hour and a half, you can't walk because your leg's gone numb, if you know what I'm talking about. The wood sign on the side that shows the attendance, and you've got the tithe on there as well, too. They kind of look at you when the tithe is like $100 at the end of the day. They're like, come on, let's get this up a little bit more. But I went from that and really went to college and moved all the way out to California after getting married to Los Angeles into a little bit different of a situation. And hey, if we wanted to talk about miracles, the real miracle in my life is that I got my wife to move to Los Angeles. And we've been married for 15 years. You know my wife really well. She is a very vocal woman. To get her to move to Los Angeles was no small feat. And so we spent about a year in Los Angeles. We moved to San Diego. And during that time, we kind of drifted away from the church for the most part. And when we got to San Diego, got the pleasure to meet a good friend of mine. Really over time, he became kind of my, call it side-by-side partner in crime for the most part. But one thing that he did is he loved me really well. And what I mean by that is about 2 weeks into getting to know him, he invited me to church. And we're like, hey, let's try it. Let's see what it is, how it experienced. We walk in with one perception growing up. My wife grew up in a Methodist church. I grew up in a Baptist. We walked in and everyone was joyful. They were praising God. It was wild. I was like, okay, everyone here is really happy. And then so we walked into service and people were actually praising God. I saw men standing for the first time, hands raised, praising God in a space. And my first reaction was, absolutely not. Not doing it. I remember we left the church that day and my wife kind of looked at me and smirked and she goes, well, what did you think? I don't know what these people are drinking, but I am out. Not doing it again. So Wednesday comes around the next week. I'm talking to my friend, and he didn't ask me. He said, hey, I'm picking you up at 10. So, okay. So I don't know what I was thinking, but second time around, let's see how this goes. I walk into the church, same thing, encounter the same situation. I'm sitting down, everyone's praising, and I'm just thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? We leave again, and at this point, my wife is like smirking at me a lot. And she goes, what'd you think? I told you, I'm out. I'm not doing it. Wednesday comes around the next week. He comes by the house. I'm picking you up at 10. Like, oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, here we go. I will tell you, the next experience was very, very different. I'll never forget, as we were sitting in worship, I was sitting in my chair while people were standing around me worshiping. And it was the first time I heard from God. And it wasn't a yell. It wasn't scream, it was a very small whisper. And all it said was, are you ashamed of me? And it broke me down. And in that moment, I realized that the facade that I was putting up, my expectations of who I am, what I've earned, what I want to be, absolutely was blocking me from seeing that God was standing there in the room with me. And at that moment, I realized it's not about me. I have to humble myself. I've got to surrender, and I've got to follow what he wants me to be. And so, in that moment, I realized that I'm so grateful that I've got a friend that loved me enough to extend the invitation, not just asking, but telling me, hey, you're going to go. But I'm also grateful that we have a God great enough to meet us in the space that we are, regardless of where we are. So I wanted to share three things this morning. One, I wanted to share what are some of those things that we need to be aware of when it comes to pride in our lives. And then I wanted to share three practical actions we can do to prevent ourselves from being trapped into that pride trap, for lack of a better word. But hey, I wanted to set the scene here. So I've been reading in Luke 14. And one thing that really stood out to me in Luke was the amount of times that Jesus dines at the table. And so as you go in there, Luke 7, you've got a meeting with Simon. You have another instance in Luke 11. And by Luke 14, Jesus gets invited by one of the leaders of the Pharisees to dine with him. And one thing that we've got to be aware of here is that the Pharisees looked at the table very different than the way that Jesus looked at the table. To the Pharisees, it wasn't just a place of gathering. It was a place of honor. It was an earned spot. When you sat at the seat of the Pharisees, it was collective people that felt like they had earned that place, and the Pharisees tried to control that situation in order to get their benefit. To Jesus, it's completely different. And you see this time and time again, whether it was in Luke 7, Luke 11, and now in Luke 14, where he would meet the Pharisees in that place, but would flip the principle and confront their pride in each one of those instances. It's actually funny to me to see that the leader of the Pharisees is inviting Jesus one more time with an expectation after Jesus has confronted them multiple times. Jesus knows what's coming. And so as you go into Luke 14, what you see is we're really setting up the first point is point number one, pride seeks to control. Pride seeks to control. So in Luke 14, you see, just to set this up, Jesus is walking to dine with the Pharisees. And it actually says that they are watching him as he approached, almost like they've planned something. And in the verse, it actually says, and behold, there's a man with dropsy. It's almost like they set this situation up. What's funny about this is, it's not like Jesus didn't anticipate this. The Pharisees, for the most part, what they're looking at is they have set up a situation to almost trap him in what they believe is the perfect trap, for lack of a better word. But what I can say is that it was an opportunity for Jesus to confront their pride in this situation. So you see, to the Pharisees over time, this is actually on the Sabbath. They had originally established rules that would help people not break the Sabbath, but over time it had actually evolved into rules that controlled the situation. Men, I think in any specific moment, we have to be aware that as men, it's very easy for us to try to control situations. Mark 7, 8 through 9 says, Jesus said to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And he continued, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. How often do we do this? I was thinking about this, just general examples of even in my life, and guys, I'm preaching to myself a little bit here, just to be honest, so bear with me as we go through this. One example is when I think about the calendar. How many times do we stack the calendar because we have to get things done? And I'm not talking about like random things. Let's say, hey, listen, I got to get my prayer time in. I've got to get time with the family. I've got to get work in. I've got to get all of these activities in out of good intention. But when the calendar gets wrecked, how frustrated do we get? How irritated do we get? One thing is I notice as you go through the Gospels, Jesus performed more miracles in the interruptions than he did in the planned actions. We have to free up our time and be able to move in the Holy Spirit so that way, when he's prepared a way for us, we're willing to walk in that direction. So, man, we have to make sure that we are not seeing control in the situation, but we're letting Jesus control the situation. Point number 2, pride measures worth. So you have this moment where Jesus obviously encounters the man with dropsy and heals him in that situation, but then he goes on to dine with the rest of the Pharisees. And he notices that as they're taking their seats, they're all taking a position of honor. Luke 14, 7 through 10 says that when he noticed the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, 'Give this person your seat.' Then humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you're invited, take the lowest place so that when your host comes, he will say to you, 'Friend, move up to a better place.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests." You know, Jesus is pointing out a critical thing that's happening right here. What he's saying is that to each of the Pharisees, as they start to vie for their place at the table, what they're doing is they're trying to get close to the host. They're trying to use what they have earned in order to take a seat that is going to be closer to the host. But what they forget is that it is not their own actions that allow them to get closer to the host, but it's the host who freely gives that place of honor. And so when we think about that in application in our own lives, as men, we tend to try to earn where our position is. That could be in our work life, could be in our relationships, could be generally for ourselves. And so when we think about that, what Jesus is doing is he's pointing out the fact that when you measure yourself on your own accomplishments, you lose sight of what cannot be earned. Our God does not call us to earn his favor, but to receive the gift that he has already given. And so, guys, pride will measure worth. Jesus says you can't earn what I've already given you. Point number 3, pride prioritizes your time. Pride prioritizes your time. Luke 14:18-20 says, "But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I've just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.'" All right, so guys, we're in the tree of trust here, right? Like, I can kind of speak freely a little bit. I think it's very ironic that Jesus is talking about like the 3 most expensive things in my life and probably ours: land, tools, and my wife. Okay, so I think about this. I know we had some DeWalt people in here. I got a lot of tools, right? Listen, Ron, you've met my wife many times. She wears a hat, literally wears a hat that says, "Put it on my husband's tab." Okay, like this is a legitimate thing. But what I want to make sure that we realize in this verse, and I mean, this hit me actually later this week, is that Jesus is referencing something very, very serious here. He's saying that stewardship, work, relationships, they can all disguise themselves as higher priorities than being in the presence of the High King. How often, when looking at where our priorities are, do we elevate those things over the opportunity to be in church, in the Bible, with men here? And it's easy to do because it often disguises itself as responsibilities, as commitments, as things that we have placed on ourselves to do, where God is saying those things are important. And I'm not saying don't be intentional about your time and where you spend it, but he's saying don't lose sight of the fact that I'm number one. He goes on through Luke 14 to talk about the cost of discipleship and the saltiness that is incorporated here. Jesus never said that discipleship didn't come with a cost. The real cost of discipleship is really dying to ourselves here. And that's what he's pointing out here, is that these are all important things, but when we're focused on ourselves, we're focused on the wrong things. Those things become important, and they are important, but we have to make sure that our focus is on the living God, on Jesus. So men, how do we avoid the path to pride? I got a couple of things for you. Number 1, be humble. Well, that's like easier said than done, I get that. So, be humble. Luke 14:11 says, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those humble themselves will be exalted." You know, I was thinking about that a bit as well this week, and like I said, it's easier said than done to humble yourself in a lot of instances. But one thing that I have actively tried to do is I realized that to humble yourself really means to stop focusing on yourself. look to others. The things that I do, am I doing it for me or am I doing it for him? Am I doing it for the other person? And this is an active muscle we have to build. This is not something that when you think about how easy it is, no. This is something you actively have to be intentional about developing. So, men, humble. To continue on the easy things, number 2, surrender. I don't think as men, it's very difficult to really step into this surrender mode. Luke 14:33 says, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciple. When Jesus is talking about surrender, and one of the things that I've learned in my life is I've realized that it takes more strength to surrender than it does to try to take over the situation. I think it's actively easy for us as men to overcome things, to like brute force our way through it. But what we find is as we actively take those things on, we continue to take the weight of the world on with us. What surrendering says is really saying, take the things off your shoulders and place it at the feet of Jesus. Put the yoke on your shoulders, but get rid of the things that don't matter. Point number 3, pursue the lost. Luke 14:23 says, then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. I look at this room and I can't help but think that our God is smiling. He is so happy to see his house filled on a Friday morning. And we should take that active approach every single day is how do we fill the house? How do we find more people to pull into the envelope? I had a good friend of mine, he actually thinking about a couple of these things. He told me 2 things, one around scheduling. He said, Mark, I think you might be doing too much. And I go, okay, noted, got it, understood. But he also said to me one time, he goes, I'm just trying to take as many people with me as possible. How simple is that? just bring them with me. There's nothing more when you think about how do you love somebody well than to bring them with you as you go along. I want to go back a bit to the parable of the banquet. Luke 14:23 said that, then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. Our God desires us to be in here. And then as he says that, he transitions to the next portion, which really is where he's talking about the parables, the lost ones. He talks about the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son. One thing about the prodigal son that I truly love is you have the sheep and the coin where it's about finding the one. And then you go to the prodigal son, which is also about bringing the son home. But then at the very end of the prodigal, you have the brother, where the brother in his pride doesn't realize the blessing that the father has given to the son that has come back home. That's clearly addressing the Pharisees and their pride in this moment, but he's calling out the fact that pride has blinded him to what truly is happening in that instance. Men, we're called to love each other well, to set aside our pride, to humble ourselves, to surrender, to seek the lost. And, when you pull all of those things together, what you find is an amazing set of gifts that come together beautifully to set the table that God has called for the lost in a way that impacts them and sets their trajectory to an amazing kingdom of heaven. And so I'm going to show you a video of what that looks like, and then after the video, we will go to the table. So hope you can play the video. I would love to hear from some of you some takeaways from the message this morning. Any takeaways from the leaders this morning? And if I don't see any hands, I'll start picking.
Well, even good things like on number 3, your responsibilities, it could be all stuff working for the Lord, and you work for the Lord so much that you just don't spend time with the Lord. So you got to put your priorities in and be sure you put the time with the Lord first and foremost, and then decide these other responsibilities, how important are they, and will they help me in my walk with God?
So good.
Hey. Yeah, so one of the guys at our table talked about wanting to share the gospel with a coworker because she's living a very ungodly life. And Jason Guell said, instead of saying anything that would make her feel condemned, just share your own testimony. Open up with her of what God's done in your life and let that draw her in. And great advice.
Guys, anyone else?
Good job. That's a great job. And I love you guys. The biggest thing at our table was this pride. And, being proud, and you get mixed up when you have to be humble, but you're still proud of some things. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong when you're proud of your grandkids. You're proud of one thing for men. There's nothing wrong with having that pride in your heart for the things that you've accomplished or how you feel about others. But thinking that you got to put Christ first. If you're putting Christ first and you're dressing with him every morning and you're doing your quiet time, it humbles you. And your accomplishments and everything, people like that, but they really look at your heart. And if you can step back, have that pride, but be humble in the Lord. Take that last seat at the table, and you're always first in heaven.
All right, anyone else? Oh. Where do we have a hand? Oh, for you. Oh, did you have one? You're up. There you go.
I thought Jeff had a great comment. He was talking about he looked at it like a hose in a bucket. Are we getting filled by God in our bucket, or are we using the hose to spill out to other people? Are we trying to give back to other people, or are we just trying to fill a bucket just so we can have our things? And I thought that was a great comment that we could carry that forward, because we all can look at it that way. It's a very simple way to look at it. So.
All right, well, hey, guys, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak this morning, and thank you all for the time for that. So I just want us to remember, really the call to action as we're thinking about going forward. Be humble, surrender, pursue the lost. Stay focused on those 3 things. Be aware of the pride, but stay focused on those 3 things, and it will become easier for you as you go forward. So I'd love to see us out in prayer. So God, thank you today for these amazing men. Lord, we pray that we focus ourselves on you in everything that we do, God. And as we go into this weekend, may we humble ourselves. May we surrender the things that we need to surrender to your feet. And may we seek the lost to fill the house that you have prepared for us. In your name I pray. Amen. Thank you, man.